so we can record our session. So today's topic is FactoryTalk Linx OPC UA. Of course, we always like to take a minute to look at what's coming up here on the agenda. We have in May, Users Group will turn to power, and that'll be on IEC 61850 standards for substation communication. June, we'll look at we'll turn to our IC, our components segment, and we'll look at intelligent smart sensors. That's going to be a pretty good topic too. IO-Link and just the smart sensors in general. And in July, going out a couple months, is Plant PAX 4.5 update, and around the release of 4.5 and what's new in that, and that'll be, of course, our automation topic. The other thing to plug real quick is just a reminder that next Thursday, the 26th, we're having our expo in Gonzales, and this is a great opportunity, if you haven't signed up for it already, to come out to a working process skid training unit at Trinova's facility in Gonzales. The whole Plant PAX system is installed and working, and it's a training unit, so it's kind of an open house style for us. We're going to kind of come in at your convenience during that day, walk around, see the unit, meet all the Rockwell team, meet our Encompass partners who will also be there, such as ProSoft and HMS and Stratus and Panduit, and the E&H rep Trinova as well. Kind of meet all those guys, talk about applications, and see it all working in that process training unit. So it's a great opportunity if you can come out next Thursday. And last, kind of our traditional slide is we post and house all of our archives at our Automation Solutions blog site. That's trctechfiles.com. And of course, we also have the reynoldsonline.com, which is where we have more of the Reynolds, corporate stuff and e-commerce. So we have two websites available for you to get a lot of information. And with that, I want to turn over to Ron. And Ron, I had found your picture earlier, so cyber stalked you a little bit. Hope you don't mind. I'm going to introduce Ron Bliss, who's a senior product manager at Rockwell Automation, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him so he can present. And Ron, you can go ahead and take that and introduce yourself.
Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we got it.
All right. Perfect. All right. Page down. Okay, so I've been with Rockwell, as you just pointed out, senior product manager at Rockwell Automation, primarily responsible for communication software. Been in the industry a long time, so yes, I have gray hair and am balding like most old guys. Been around doing a lot of different things in communications, built systems for about 10 years, and actually was the original product manager that was responsible for the creation of the Logix controller, and I managed that for about 13 years. Spent some time in the visualization business, working on the creation of the View 5000 product line, and took leadership of the communication space in 2014. And also Rockwell's representation for the OPC Foundation. And amongst all that, my claim to fame, I have over 100 patents filed. 50 have been approved by the patent offices, and doing a lot with Boy Scouts, and my son's an Eagle Scout. So a little bit of everything there. Feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. So we'll give you a little bit of a background here. I'm going to cover a lot of ground today. So we'll give you a little bit of a history of where we are with our communication software. We have some name changes that are coming up. So FactoryTalk Linx is probably a new name for many people. And then we'll talk about new capabilities that are coming in. The OPC UA, I think, is a primary focus. We'll talk about some other extensions that we're also doing in the program or in the soft communication space to enhance our portfolio. So these are the products that you probably know and are familiar with today in the communications portfolio. RS Linx Classic provides the foundation for most of the design tools. It also provides an OPC interface for OPC Classic, OPC DA, to allow you to extract information from the system. And it's, I'd say this is probably one of the highest or largest installed base of communication packages really for any vendor. I mean, it's out there for pretty much every product that we've shipped and sold since the early 90s, so it's been around a long time. RS Linx Enterprise came along a couple of years after that, almost 10 years after that, and brought in additional capabilities, and really it was the foundation for our FactoryTalk's software portfolio. Live data is essentially a communications service that is delivered with our service platform that allows us to distribute information from Linx Enterprise to other products. And then we have another package called FactoryTalk Gateway, which is, again, it's an OPC interface that actually sits on top of Linx Enterprise. So now that you're familiar with all those, what you're going to see in a few slides is we're about to change all that. So as I said, Linx Classic came in actually in the early 90s. And it was actually based on a couple of different things. Rockwell or Allen Bradley had a product called Interchange. And if you recall the old former ICOM product or business, when they were acquired, they had a product called WinLinx. Those were kind of merged together to become what is today Linx Classic. And so over the years, Linx Classic, Linx was renamed Linx Classic after Linx Enterprise came along. And we've been gradually extending the portfolio. We added OPC over the years. In fact, when the Linx Gateway came out, it was actually the extension of OPC even on top of Linx Enterprise. And then it was renamed at one point to FactoryTalk Gateway, but for some reason we left Linx Enterprise as Linx Enterprise. So that's probably the other big thing that's happening this year is we're renaming the products to really leverage a new naming scheme. And so that's what you see here. So what is Linx Enterprise will from this day forward be called FactoryTalk Linx. In fact, if you've downloaded the View 10 or FactoryTalk Services Platform version 3, you will have seen that what was Linx Enterprise has become FactoryTalk Linx. And then we're also renaming the FactoryTalk Linx Gateway, or excuse me, the FactoryTalk Gateway to FactoryTalk Linx Gateway, so that these names coincide going forward. And really, the way to think about it is we deliver this FactoryTalk Linx free with all of our software so that you can use it to obtain information from our Logix controllers, just like we did with Linx Classic Lite. And the FactoryTalk Gateway is essentially what you would purchase if you want to add OPC DA or OPC UA capabilities to the system. And UA is really new, and we'll talk about what we're doing there. So as this picture portrays, and we're going to talk more about this, one of the primary reasons for that rename operation is that we've done a lot of work in what was Linx Enterprise to extend its functionality. So if you think about the three major areas that you use design software, the one or communication software, the one that most people think about is the operation space, where you're pulling data from a live system and you're using that to animate your screens or to collect the information into databases and other information systems. And so both of those in the operate space, both Linx Classic as well as now FactoryTalk Linx could provide those services. And until the recent release of Logix v31, you had to leverage pretty much Linx Classic if you wanted to use it with your design tools, or if you wanted to do things to maintain or access your control system. And so what we're doing is we're extending FactoryTalk Linx, and you'll see a demonstration of that today, where we can now use that same communication package across the board in those other spaces. And so the other thing that we'll touch on briefly is there's also a new FactoryTalk Linx ComDTM for instrumentation that allows you to perform asset management types of functions using FactoryTalk Linx as a communication service for asset management software, Asset Center, Henderson Hauser, E&H, Field Care, I think they call it. So there's some asset management capabilities that can now leverage and use FactoryTalk Linx as a communication service as well. So as you can see, FactoryTalk Linx is becoming more pervasive. You'll see that over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to transition most of our software over to FactoryTalk Linx and become less reliant on Linx Classic. Classic's not going away anytime soon, but we're trying to really shift the focus to FactoryTalk Linx. Okay, so OPC. So what is it? First off, OPC stands for Open Platform Communications. And the way you can think of this is it's a standard for how automation software can exchange information. There were two versions of the specification. There was a version that came out in around 2000 or 2001 that provided data access capabilities and some other functionality. And that was really I would say until recently, that was the primary communications mechanism that automation software would use to exchange information. Around, I think it was 2008 or 2006, somewhere in that neighborhood, the OPC Foundation wanted to extend the reach of the OPC standard so that it was no longer dependent solely on Microsoft technologies, and they also wanted to provide, I would say, a more common interaction for how you access data. So they coined the term unified architecture that became UA and released a new form of the specification. And so since then, a number of vendors and products, and now even ourselves, have been working to add the new form of communications, the unified architecture communications, into our product portfolio. All of the OPC communications are essentially client server. So you have a server that hosts and delivers information to somebody, and then a client would essentially request that information that they're interested in. So how does it fit in? And I think the bottom picture really kind of tells where we think that fits. So if you think about our FactoryTalk service portfolio and Ethernet IP, we have the ability to go very deep. We support motion control, we support safety, I/O. I mean, a lot of different things we can do. Controller to controller communications. We can access the information for the service level. And so OPC Classic, because it was dependent on Microsoft technologies, was really limited to just that server level PC architecture for exchanging information. And what's happened with UA, and really this line kind of tells it here, is that they transitioned off of the Microsoft DCOM technologies to just essentially a TCP transport, which is, interestingly enough, what we do with FactoryTalk and Ethernet IP. And by doing that, it eliminates the dependency of being tied solely to a PC architecture. And since then, we're starting to see that OPC is starting to work its way lower into the architecture. There are a number of different products from different vendors that are now actually embedding UA server capabilities directly into them. And then you can use that also as a mechanism to provide even peer-to-peer communications. Keep in mind, though, I mean, it has its limits. So OPC does not support safety, does not support motion. There's a number of things that you still need a more, I'd say, application-specific protocol like Ethernet IP in order to perform those functions. OPC UA has a number of different capabilities as depicted here in the top left. There's a data model which is very similar to what we do today in a Logix controller, where you can have structures, you can have scalar data, you can have arrays, you can mix and match that and have a very complex structure. Whereas OPC DA back in the day was really limited to scalar data. And so one of the things that I think a big extension to the UA spec was to really adopt a more comprehensive data capability, much like we do in a Logix controller. There's a couple of different protocol mechanisms. There is some security capabilities where you can enhance and get encrypted and signed communications so you can ensure the integrity of the information. There's a new effort underway to do time-sensitive networking where you could schedule the networks, much like we used to do with ControlNet. And then as far as how the kinds of information that you can exchange, you have the ability to read, write, subscribe to data. There's a new mechanism called methods, which would allow you to essentially trigger an operation in a device and have that information, have information be exchanged as that trigger occurs. So you could, for example, initiate some action and get a piece of data back as a result of that action being performed. Alarms are very similar to our FactoryTalk alarms and events capability, where you could communicate an alarm event and have a information or a visualization system do something with it. Historical data really is, I would say, time-stamped time series data, where you've got a timestamp and a value for when that value changes. And then they also have a mechanism called pub-sub, which allows you to essentially produce, publish a value and have multiple consumers of that value, which again looks very much like produce consume tags that we've had in Logix for the last 2 decades. All right, so as I said, our product portfolio has supported OPC DA for many years, and so our FactoryTalk Services platform has the ability to interface with and pull information in from third-party servers using OPC DA. Our FactoryTalk Linx Gateway product also acts as a DA server so that we can allow information that we're collecting from Linx and from other parts of the system to go out to a third-party package. So this enables us to extend the reach of the connected enterprise to support third-party information coming in as well as third-party software by delivering information to them. And really, as the UA and the new bullets indicate here, is that we are extending that portfolio so that now our services platform can now access third-party UA servers in addition to the DA server capability that we've had before. And then likewise, the FactoryTalk Linx Gateway is being extended so that information out of our architecture, like from FactoryTalk Linx, can be pulled and sent out to third-party servers. So looking at the first one, this is the bottom of that. So we have this new component called the OPC UA connector. And really what it does is and when you configure this in the system to point at a UA server, which might be down here, one of the first things we do is we browse, we essentially upload the namespace out of that server and we extend it into the FactoryTalk namespace. And by doing that, you've got the ability from like View SE to browse and view the tags from Logix. Well, by incorporating the namespace from these third-party servers into that, you'll be able to browse and access the names and the type information associated with third-party UA servers. Then when you've configured your system, at runtime, then you can subscribe to data as well as access diagnostic information. So for all intents and purposes in FactoryTalk, it pretty much looks like, once you've got it configured, it looks like the system is talking to a Logix controller. We basically mirror the information in and make it look like the constructs that would come from Logix so that it's pretty much seamless as far as how you would access it. This connector, by the way, actually released in January as part of FactoryTalk Services version 3.0. So if you've got the latest build that came out in January, you now have the ability to go access and pull information in from third-party UA servers. It's freely included with all of the FactoryTalk services. We don't charge for this capability. And as I said, once that information, so you can think of this, down here we have the various data sources across the system. So FactoryTalk Linx really is the primary data source for most of the FactoryTalk portfolio. And the UA connector you can see here as a new data source that can now feed information through the FactoryTalk services to the entire portfolio. So now any information that comes in from any of the servers on the bottom is exposed so that any of the software products on the top have access to that information. So by adding this new UA connector into the FactoryTalk services, we've essentially extended our entire software portfolio to now act as an OPC UA client. That's pretty big. We probably now have the largest portfolio of OPC UA enabled software in the market. And then the FactoryTalk Linx Gateway, which we'll touch on in a minute, can also take information from any of these servers and actually extend that reach out further so that a third-party package can also utilize that information in the system. The good news is the way this is architected, it's a very scalable and distributed solution. So you can set this up in a single workstation where your FactoryTalk software, the UA connector, and even the UA server were all running together. You could configure this in different ways where the UA connector is on one box, your software, FactoryTalk software is somewhere else. You could put these two together and have the UA software on a different box or have them all split up in different boxes. We can also, that connector, you can install multiple workstations and use FactoryTalk services to distribute that information and share it across to multiple software packages. And this is really, I'd say, kind of the plant PAX model, where you're going to pull information in potentially from multiple sources, distribute that, and have multiple FactoryTalk clients, for example, View clients, being able to share that information. Each connector has the ability to interface with up to 20 UA servers. And then you have the ability in the FactoryTalk, we generally recommend no more than 10 data servers, but you know, you think about that, 10 times 20, you just have the ability right there alone to interface with up to 200 different data servers. Now, I will say that depending on how big those data servers are, that you may run into other limitations, and we might want to look if your system starts to get any larger than a handful of these. But it's nice to know that the capabilities are there for, you know, anything from a small standalone configuration up to a very large distributed system. How this works, in fact, let me actually pop over to a quick demonstration. If I can hit the right key here. So bring up the FactoryTalk admin console. And so really what we did, and so if you're in the FactoryTalk administration console, this is typically where you would configure your FactoryTalk Linx, or if you remember the name, RS Linx Enterprise. And so in here, when you want to add a data server, what you'll see is, oops, I double clicked on that. What you'll see is there is a couple of options there, right? So you can add FactoryTalk Linx. You could add a DA server, and now with the new UA connector, you have the ability to add a UA server, okay? And the way that configuration looks, in fact, we even incorporate the connections to all the servers that you have available. We bring those in and show those to you. But the configuration is basically done from in the admin console. You can pick where you want this to run in your system. You have the ability to set up, and this is where I would set up my linkage to multiple servers. So I can configure this to multiple servers, and I forgot to start my OPC servers. Let me get those going here. Once those get online, this thing will retry and eventually pick those back up. But this is where you would configure the OPC servers that you want to interface with in your system. There are some security capabilities, and this is where we have our outgoing certificate. As we go forward, we'll be enhancing and adding additional communications and security capabilities. We also have a whole range of diagnostic information associated with the services that we're communicating to. And then there's also the FactoryTalk diagnostic log, so you can see what's going on with the communications itself. Okay, one of our servers looks like they're up now. But once we've done that, you literally have the ability to access that information just like you would any other piece of data from the architecture. And I'm looking for my test client. Here we go. Let me switch this back to FactoryTalk. And in my sample app, and now it's not going to come up because the server wasn't started when I started my effort. Let's see what happens here. Should have thought to start my server ahead of time. Well, I guess we'll skip that. All right, so the next piece, and then we'll go out. This is the top end of, if you recall that slide showing the two different data servers. You have the ability to essentially pull information from FactoryTalk Linx from any of our Logix, Allen Bradley PLC, SLC, Micro 800 controllers, and extend that so that third-party client software has the ability to access it. So this could be MES, it could be another visualization package, could be any number of reasons that you want to do this. And so really, we're just extending the reach of the gateway. It already had OPC DA capabilities, and now the FactoryTalk Linx gateway adds the new UA capabilities. And again, keep in mind that this is TCP, so it does have some other benefits. I will say that when we were doing our testing, in comparison with the DA side, we typically, I would say, we would hit a limit probably around 200,000 tags where we would start to struggle. Our testing with the UA side went much higher. We actually reached almost 500,000 tags before we started to run into some other issues. So that's really good to know that the TCP and the UA typically can provide higher bandwidth and a higher amount of data than we could see through DA in the past. The gateway is being, as we talked about, it's going to get a new name. It's also going to get some new catalog numbers, and the licensing mechanism is going to be updated a little bit differently than it was sold in the past. So in the past, it was sold based solely on tag quantity, and so we're doing kind of a mixture of tag quantity and scope. Really, the four different packages here. Basic is really, you can think about it as a really small standalone type of a system. where the Linx is running on the same workstation with the gateway and accessing a small amount of tags. Notice that we will provide the ability to access 1,000 tags from the DA side and simultaneously 1,000 tags from the UA side. So you kind of get a 2-for-1. Moving up the list here, standard extends that reach to support more tags, but again, also the Linx data server needs to run in a single workstation. We go up to distributed and pro. We can now support distributed multiple FactoryTalk Linx data servers in your system, as well as redundancy. And then the professional, and you're going to see this in the future, probably distributed and pro will both start to pick up incremental features and capabilities. There's, I would say we're just at the beginning of adding OPC UA capabilities to the software. And as we do that, there's going to be new functionality. One new capability, we have a new software package called the Data Bridge, which will be included with the professional. The Data Bridge can be used to pull information from a third-party client, OPC UA client, and actually deliver that to like a Logix controller. So it can act as a kind of a proxy to pull information from one part of the system and deliver it to another. But that will only be included in the professional. And going forward, there'll be other capabilities that will probably come in. So just so you know, these packages, we're in the final factory acceptance test for the gateway. This package is right now slated to release probably next week. And so the new catalog numbers will turn on and as soon as that becomes available, and we'll probably start turning off the old catalog numbers for the existing gateway. So the gateway, again, can support a range of applications. As you can see here, the small standalone types of applications would use the basic or the standard. In those cases, both FactoryTalk Linx and the FactoryTalk Linx gateway software would essentially be installed on the same workstation. Then when you start to distribute those, you would need to move up to the distributor, the professional. And really, when you get up to the large distributed applications, you can even support multiple data servers, and those data servers, the FactoryTalk Linx data servers can even be redundant. So a lot more functionality than the simple OPC DA services that you had in RS Linx Classic. It's a much more scalable solution, has much better capacity, has much better performance than RS Linx Classic did in the past. So if I've got existing catalog numbers, if I've got existing Classic, and I want to move to the new FactoryTalk Linx Gateway to pick up the OPC capabilities, this gives you kind of a breakdown of the various bundles that you might choose. And then in migrating from FactoryTalk Gateway to FactoryTalk Linx Gateway would need to transition again to a different catalog number. As far as the configuration of the gateway, let me go back over. Oh, look, my servers came up while I was doing that, and now we can actually see the two data servers that were actually connected. So let me expand this out, and we can actually put some data online here. So I've got some dynamic data. I'm going to grab some scalar values. I'm just going to grab this whole branch of data and tell it to put it online. Oops. Add branch. Yeah, that's what I need. There we go. Oh, or do I just select this and do add branch? Oh, well. There we go. So now we're online with the data server, getting some data out of it and actually displaying it. So as you saw, we can browse the data servers just like we would a Logix controller. We're using the test client to read information from a OPC server. And those are those two OPC servers that I started that are running on this workstation. Okay, so that's the connector. It's now up and operating. The other thing that we can do is launch the gateway. Oh, and I already have it launched. And so the gateway configuration, again, what we're doing is you're going to pick where in FactoryTalk you want to pull information from. And then you can choose the name of that particular service. And you'll notice here that we have both UA as well as DA, right? So I have one server or one setup configuration that allows me to control both of those. And they share essentially the same scope and setup that you would have. And then we can also register with a discovery service that makes it easier for clients to locate the information. With UA, you have the concept of what's called an endpoint, and you can think of this as a connection method that an external client would access. You can specify the port, the TCP port that will be used. And right now, you'll see in the first release, the security mode and policy are none and none. As we go forward in the future, in fact, later this year, we'll be adding the ability to add signing as well as encrypted communications to the gateway itself. Like the connector, you have access to the FactoryTalk diagnostics, and also you can view the contents of our outgoing certificate. And say, so if I want to access that, what I can do is I'm just going to launch a OPC Foundation sample client here. And so I will hit the discovery service, and it will tell me what's there. And you can see I have FactoryTalk Linx Gateway as an option. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to that. And I'm just going to tell it OK, OK. And now I'm online with the gateway. Okay, so this is now, I'm now looking at the data area that we have. So I've got one controller that I don't know if I'm online with right now, or I've got the UA connector. And I'm browsing, literally I'm coming from an OPC UA client into FactoryTalk Linx, and then I'm going back out OPC, and you can see that I can browse and access that same information that we were just viewing from the other one, right? So here we see where we're coming in from OPC, going through the gateway, going across FactoryTalk, and then actually going out one of these UA services on the other side here. All right. So again, very straightforward as far as the capabilities and how you integrate that with the system itself. Another thing, and I mentioned that FactoryTalk Linx supports redundancy. One of the other things that you can do is if you want to take advantage of that redundancy and enhance your system for high availability types of applications, by installing the FactoryTalk Linx Gateway and using the distributed or professional versions of it on the workstation where your client's at, we can then use the FactoryTalk services to provide access to redundant data servers. And so the nice part here is that Linx, each one of these Linx servers will essentially request the data that the gateway wants, and then one of them will continually feed the data out to the gateway to the external client. If this server were to shut down, the communications would automatically revert to the secondary server to do that same communication. So you have the ability to use or take advantage of FactoryTalk Linx's high availability and redundant server capability to improve the ability to keep your system up and running and keep information flowing out to the external client. Okay, so that kind of sums up most of what we're doing here for the UA space. You know, as far as kind of the basics here, right, we do provide access to read, write, and subscribe to data. Initially, it's focused on the TCP binary, non-secured, non-redundant transport. I will say that we will be working on extensions to that as we go forward. We can work with some servers and clients require certificates. We can work with them either if they require a certificate or they do not require a certificate. I think version 1.02 of the specification required a certificate, and when they made a change to the spec, certificates were no longer required for the non-secured interfaces. So we can work with both. Going forward, we are working on, in fact, my development team is currently working on adding the encryption as well as the user mode security into both our UA client and our FactoryTalk Linx Gateway. And so later this year, we'll be making that available. We're also working with the OPC Foundation on the conformance requirements. One of those is making sure we have security. So as we go forward, we're looking to actually get the products tested in the OPC Foundation labs to verify the conformance. There's going to be some other data access capabilities. One of the things we found when we first did the setup, arrays, when the connector attempted to talk to arrays in some of the external servers, it turned out to be a very complex process. So we did not enable that initially in the first release, but we're going to be working on that. And actually the development team's working on that right now with the plan to enable that later this year as well. There's other things that we want to provide access to in the future, things like descriptions and ranges and some other stuff, and predefined and custom types that we'll be looking at as we go forward. As I mentioned, OPC has a full range of capabilities like methods, alarms, and some other things. And so we're going to be looking at adding those in. So as I said, this is probably the first of many releases, and we will continue to enhance and extend that capability as we go forward. So looking at, if you compare Linx Classic to FactoryTalk Linx Gateway, if you're trying to make a buying decision, I think it's always important to understand what are some of the key differences between those. And I would say, really what you're seeing is a large part of our focus is really on the FactoryTalk Linx space, more so than ours Linx Classic. And as you see, we added UA capabilities. There's other capabilities that make it more desirable. If you want to modify your configuration remote, or if you want to modify it while the system is running, I think that's a critical feature. Whereas Linx Classic, for example, if you're running as a service, you may actually have to shut down that service in order to modify the configuration. Capacity-wise, we do know, and performance-wise, that FactoryTalk Linx is going to give you better performance and higher capacity than ours Linx Classic. From a high availability standpoint, we have redundant data servers, and these two features are new this year. They just became available when we released FactoryTalk Linx, and we'll talk about what they are, but we've added some additional support for high availability systems. Right now, Linx Classic still has an advantage in a couple areas. It has better DH+ support. You can bridge from Ethernet to DH+, and that's something that we'll be working on in FactoryTalk Linx in the future. FactoryTalk Linx, or ours Linx Classic, also has this ability to use one Linx workstation as kind of a gateway to your system so that multiple design tools can remotely access that system. So that's another feature that we'll be adding. The other thing is, I'd say Linx Classic, by virtue of it being around a lot longer, has better legacy support. So if you still have some old PLC2s or PLC3s in your system, it's going to have support for that. Whereas FactoryTalk Linx is really focused on the modern, and higher capacity capabilities. The nice part is you can still leverage Linx Classic in a system with FactoryTalk Linx, but when it comes to the majority of the function of what you would need it for, FactoryTalk Linx is really much better suited. So I don't know if that's probably a good breaking point for questions. I don't know if there are any questions. If there are, probably right now is a good time to ask them as far as the OPC functionality.
Yep, the web audience, of course, you can type in the chat question pane, or if you want to ask it live, you can raise your hand. I can unmute your line as well, so give you guys a minute. I might have had a question back on, you talk about the data bridge capability and the ability to actually bring OPC data into like a ControlLogix controller through the data bridge. So that would, I guess, kind of materialize into a controller tag or something. You could have a link between the controller and the data bridge.
Yeah, I actually didn't present those slides. Let me bring it up. I can actually do that now. So let me show another slide here that was hidden in the deck. I wasn't sure how interested people would be in that. And so the way to think about that is it's another piece of software that would run on a workstation somewhere. That workstation could be a dedicated PC. It could be a compute module in a chassis. It could be a VersaView 5400 in a panel. And really what it does is it sits above Linx and the UA connector, so that, and what you do is you essentially map a set of tags. So over here you say, hey, I want this tag from this server to go to this tag in this controller. And then it basically subscribes to that data so that when that data comes in, the data bridge literally just forwards it on to the target where that information is at. So as it says, you basically get tag pairs. There's also some diagnostic information. I don't know if I have here we go. There's some additional quality information that you can set up. There's even the ability to do the configuration through an import-export capability like in an Excel spreadsheet. So there's a bunch of functionality here, and you can set up the data rate that you want. And so what it's doing, as I said, is it will subscribe on one side to the data, and then based on when that data arrives, it will immediately forward it over to the destination that you've configured.
Okay. Yeah, definitely I see a good use case with the compute module in chassis. or even the new 5480 once that is released as well.
Yep,
that.
and that's, yeah, we built this piece of software explicitly for those platforms where maybe you have a robot. Yeah, if you think about it, here I'm showing a third-party package, right? But maybe this is a robot that I want to interface my Logix to, right? Well, you drop a compute module, put the gateway or the data bridge on there, and an appropriate gateway activation, and you'll be able to pull the information in to deliver it. And so it can take information both directions. So I could take information from Logix and push that out to the third-party, server, or I could take information from that server and push that into Logix. So it's essentially a bidirectional, data mover, which is why we called it data bridge, to exchange information from UA to some other data source. And it could be that I'm taking it from one data server to another either. It doesn't have to necessarily be a Logix controller. It could be some other data source in the system.
And that looks good. Thanks for taking a minute to explain that. I don't see any questions from the audience, so if you got a few more slides, then probably keep on.
I'll keep going. All right. So the other big thing that we're doing this year, and my slides appear out of order. Let's see what happened. I'm missing a slide. There we go. Okay. So the other new thing that we're doing this year, and this just came out with Logix v31, is we've added the ability for you to now use FactoryTalk Linx as the communication service for our FactoryTalk Linx and even Control Flash software packages. So both Control Flash Plus, Studio 5000 Launcher, Studio 5000 Architect, Logix Designer all now have the ability to leverage FactoryTalk Linx as their communication. So rather than actually talking about it in slide form, let me go in and actually do a quick presentation or demonstration of that. So here we're in V31 of Logix Designer. And as I said, you have the ability here to select what communication package you want. Normally when you go to browse, what you see is this is actually the view from RS Linx Classic, right? And so when I want to browse the network, I'm actually going out and it's interfacing with RS Linx Classic to pull information from the network and the system itself. So the problem becomes if a device that I want to see on here doesn't show up, well, I actually have to leave this environment, go over to Linx Classic, reconfigure it in Linx Classic, and then come back in here and restart my view in order to pick that up. And those of us that have been in this space for a while, we're just kind of used to that, so we just do it. Well, with FactoryTalk Linx, we felt that those were unnecessary steps. So when we incorporated FactoryTalk Linx in, what you'll see is the browser is a little bit different. The main view that I use to access it is the same, but you now have the ability to do things like add a driver, or in the case of a driver that's already configured, I can reconfigure that driver and add content into it. One of the things that you'll see right away here is you see that I have this little function called arrange. This driver actually, by the way, in Linx Classic, you would have had both an Ethernet devices and an Ethernet IP driver. We merged those into a single driver. So I can set it up as a broadcast discovery, or I can use a device list. And if I use a device list, I have the ability, and bring this up, I have the ability to have a single item, a range of items. I can have DHCP names, a bunch of things there to help you with the configuration. So the range piece here is kind of cool when you think about it. Rather than having to type in 33, 34, and 35 and their IP addresses, now I can just put in a range. We also give you some really nice ability, so I can copy, and let's bring up a notepad, and I can paste. We can even do some other interesting things here, like maybe I want to do, let me delete a couple of things here and copy this, and I'll do a quick edit. Let me do 9. Right, and I'll copy these. And I will go back over here and I will paste those in, right? So now you can see that instead of having to and being limited to the tools that we have for doing the import or the creation of your configuration, you can do that in an automated way in another tool. You could copy and paste these into an email and send them to somebody. You could, once you get one configured, you could copy and paste it onto all your, take the information and deliver it to all your friends in the plant so they can all share the same configuration. So it provides some other nice capabilities for working with them. But the nice part, though, when you think about it, is instead of me having to leave the environment and go somewhere else, reconfigure and come back, it's now built right in. So all the configuration that you need is here. And the other thing I like to show, because I'm getting a little bit older there, is to make it easier to see, we even give you a nice little zooming function. Another interesting piece here is a lot of times you may remember, hey, I know I've got this controller out there, but I can't quite remember where it is. Oh, and of course, I found one that I have not searched. Oops. Did I browse it? There we go, 17. So I got a 11756-L, right? And so now it found my L3. So it didn't have the name I thought was on it, right? So this is basically just a soft search. You can set up some filters. What do you want to search on? You can search on address, you can search on device, you can search on the name, or even the path itself. But it lets you filter down the list here, and you can see I can filter. It's a soft search, so anything in this case that has 1756 in it's going to show up. So again, really trying to help you get online more quickly. Another feature that's in here, automatic EDS upload capability. We also support, if I'm on a device that has an EDS like this, I could also do an EDS upload off of that device. Browsing through the device, obviously, same thing that you would have gotten. You also see that we support both the local and public network address for translation. I'm going over Wi-Fi here, so it looks like I'm having some delays. So we show both the public and private in a NATed network address translated network. So we give you all the same capabilities that you would have seen in Linx Classic, plus the configuration capabilities here. Oh, and one other nice feature, let's say that I don't want to see the rest of the noise that's in that network. I can hit this anchor function, and what it does is it literally zooms me in, so I'm only looking at that branch, and you can see now the breadcrumbs across the rest of the way. So much more functionality. Let me switch back over to the presentation. Much more functionality than we had in the browser for RS Linx Classic. But again, you're going to see that you have the option. I think this year, Linx Classic is still the default with V31, but you can switch over it to it if you're using V31 and forward. And probably later this year with V32, we may make FactoryTalk Linx the default going forward. But Linx Classic will still be there and it'll still be supported. I touched on all this, right? You have the ability to configure local and remote. You can set up the driver list. You can configure your stuff. You can copy and paste the content out to an Excel spreadsheet, copy it back in. You can do searches. I showed you the anchor feature. So that's kind of, and then the EDS upload capability. So that sums up the new functionality with Logix Designer. Some other things, and I've touched on most of the stuff here. This is kind of the summary of what's new this year. The other big things that we've got are some new redundancy paths. So the first one here is maybe you've got a configuration where you've got a critical piece of equipment that you want to keep up. You don't necessarily need controller redundancy, but you want to make sure that you can always talk to it. And so in this case, we have a new shortcut type in FactoryTalk Linx where you can set up 2 paths to a device. And what it's going to do is it's going to let you configure both routes through 2 different paths to get to the same controller. Linx will then establish communication simultaneously on both routes, but it'll use one route for all of its communication, in this case, the one on the left. If that route were to fail, it just immediately turns on the secondary. And what we do is we actually monitor, as listed here, at about a 2-second rate. We monitor the information, the communications, and detect when that failure occurs and just automatically switch over. And it does it so quickly that generally your operator interface can't even tell that something's happened, which is kind of nice. You never see a wireframe. It just literally switches. There's also a whole slew of predefined diagnostic tags that are available, so you can actually animate this on the screen. You could trigger alarms based on it in the FactoryTalk Alarm and Event subsystem. So it gives you some more capabilities to help ensure that you've got active communications all the time. The second type of path that we added is one to support Logix Redundancy. And so what this one does is, again, it gives you two paths, one to the primary and a secondary path to the secondary controller. And you'll notice here, if you know Logix Redundancy, we're giving you the option to set fixed IP addresses instead of setting their IP addresses identical and having the secondary get incremented. We're going to set fixed IP addresses, and then they won't swap IP addresses. With this new shortcut type, FactoryTalk Linx will establish simultaneously communications to both the primary and the secondary. So everything is up and ready when it needs it. Well, if something happens and this controller shuts down and it switches and this one takes over, Linx is sitting here polling the secondary at 100 millisecond rate to see when it has taken over. Well, it literally just switches and starts talking to the secondary within around 100 milliseconds. Again, it happens so fast that you can't even tell on the HMI that the Logix controller has switched. By contrast, today, typically what happens is on a switchover, because the TCP connections are broken, Linx would wait about 20 seconds while it's waiting for the TCP connection to time out, and then the data on your screen would wireframe. So what happens is your view screens, for example, would freeze for 20 seconds while we wait for that timeout. After the timeout, all of our data would be marked bad quality, and Linx goes through and tries to reestablish the communications. Well, it'll recover typically in a few seconds, but you've got that period of time, 20 seconds or more, where the data on your HMI is no longer being updated. And so what this does is it gets rid of that blind time and allows you instantaneous switch over on the information, the visualization system when Logix switches over. And that'll also work with redundant data servers. So you could have two Linx data servers, each configured in that system, simultaneously interfacing with your Logix redundancy system. So this is out for FactoryTalk Linx. This will require a firmware update in the Logix controller as well as the EN2T. So that's actually in the plan. It's in the works right now with a target of, I believe, July for release of that functionality. Okay, one other capability we're adding, Logix controllers added a new tag-based alarm capability. And so it allows you to configure, you could take any tag, right-click on it, add an alarm to it, and once you've done that, you now have alarms in your system that would operate independent of the program scan. So this new capability in Logix is added to the L8s, and they did it in the L8s because it has a separate core available to do that extra alarm processing. And so in order to support that, that'll be fed directly into the FactoryTalk alarm and event infrastructure. And that's what you see here is FactoryTalk alarms and events can subscribe to those alarms and feed the alarms up to the alarm summary content. But let's just say that you want to animate content on your HMI screen. Well, we've added Linx, the ability to communicate directly to the alarm tags. So the alarm tags show up a little bit different. They use the base tag name .@alarm, and then the alarm name that you provide plus an attribute name. And that's what you see here is this list of attribute names. So now we've extended FactoryTalk Linx so that you could animate your graphics by directly accessing any of the alarm information for these new tag-based alarms in the system. One caution, because of the amount of these, we didn't want to push those into the namespace just yet. So you will have to manually enter those names, but we did fully document all the members in the help system so you have access to that information. But the nice part again is you can now extend your graphics and access that tag-based alarm information directly. One other extension to the FactoryTalk Linx gateway this year, and actually I think it was, here it was version 5.8 of FactoryTalk Linx added the ability to access SIP energy information, but we did not turn that on in the gateway. So now with this release, we can expose the SIP energy information available in this range of products. We can access or expose that SIP energy information out to third parties. And then the last piece is we've extended the environment to support configuration of Ethernet IP-based instruments. So for example, E&H and some other vendors are actually building Ethernet IP-based instruments for the process market. And so we've created a new FactoryTalk Linx COM DTM that can act as the communication portal to those instruments. And so a tool like FactoryTalk Asset Center with the DTMs installed can actually communicate through the COM DTM to actually access this. This is also available. It's a free download that's available on the Rockwell Automation download site. And it can be used with third-party software as well. So if you prefer, E&H Field Care, you could sit that on top of FactoryTalk Linx and use that to access the Ethernet instruments that would be in your system. Okay, so this kind of sums it up, kind of where we're going. I would say our focus going forward, we're going to continue to work on adding capacity, performance, and other functionality in order to meet more demanding applications, particularly in the process space. We're enabling access to other information in Logix. You see that through, I think it was last year we added support for descriptions and min and max values and the other extended properties. This year we've added configured alarms capability, so the tag-based alarms, you can access that. We're working to unify all of the Rockwell Automation software portfolio on essentially a single comms package, that being FactoryTalk Linx. As you see, we're doing some work in the redundancy space. I have some more work in the redundancy space that we plan to do in the coming years. We have a lot of work in front of us on OPC UA. We've got the first versions shipping in the case of the connector or about to ship in the case of the gateway, and we're going to continue to be extending those as we go forward. I think later this year, with the releases that are planned, you're going to see a lot more functionality in the security space. So we're doing a lot of investments in the security area. I guess probably at TechEd, we'll be talking about some of that functionality. And so I think this is my last slide. The next big thing is Rockwell Automation TechEd in June 10th through the 15th in San Diego. We actually have two different sessions set up for FactoryTalk Communications. One of those is actually a hands-on. The first one is a demonstration, and the second one is actually a hands-on where you can actually work with the products and the software and learn how they function directly. And that's pretty much it. So we used almost all the time, but if there are any questions, feel free.
Yep. Well, thanks, Ron. We'll do one more call for questions. Chat window, or raise your hand. I can unmute you. As always, you can reach out to us after the fact, and we'll be happy to answer questions or pass it on to Ron as well if it's a deep one. Give everybody a minute just to get their fingers moving there. But Ron, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us as always. We thanks to Chris over here, we always get some product managers to speak for us, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that for us today.
Yeah, no problem.
And to our audience, as always, thank you for taking an hour out of your day to join us and listen in. We know time is valuable, so we always appreciate your attendance. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. I'm not seeing anybody ask a question, which is fine. We've got a shy group today, no problem. But once again, thank you, Ron, and thank you, audience, and we'll see you at our next users group next month. All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Ron.